March 18th, 1944, a radio intercept station outside Calais, France. Hauptmann Klaus Weber of the German Funkabwehr leaned closer to his headset as another burst of Morse code crackled through the static. 3 dots, a dash, 2 more dots. The pattern was familiar, unmistakable even. He'd been tracking this particular operator for 6 weeks now. American First Army Group, FUSAG, General George Patton's command. Weber scribbled notes in his logbook, cross-referencing the transmission against his growing file of intercepted American radio traffic. The signal's intelligence suggested massive troop concentrations across southeastern England, tank divisions, artillery regiments, entire corps preparing for the inevitable invasion across the Strait of Dover. The pattern was clear. The Allies would strike at Pas-de-Calais, the shortest route to Germany's industrial heartland. But something nagged at Weber's trained ear. Something he couldn't quite articulate. The American operator sending this traffic had a distinctive fist, the unique rhythm and timing that made every Morse code operator as identifiable as a fingerprint. Weber had logged this particular fist for weeks, yet lately there were variations, tiny inconsistencies in the spacing between characters, slight differences in the length of dashes. Either the operator was getting sloppy, or Weber was tracking multiple operators using the same call sign. He dismissed the thought. Standard procedure dictated 1 operator per call sign. The variations were probably just fatigue or atmospheric interference. The intelligence was solid. The pattern unmistakable. FUSAG was preparing to invade at Calais, and every transmission confirmed it. What Weber didn't know, what German intelligence wouldn't discover until long after the war had ended, was that the man behind that Morse key wasn't with FUSAG at all. He was part of a deception so audacious that it would keep 15 German divisions frozen in place while the real invasion landed 200 miles away. One radio operator's stupid improvisation was about to change the course of history. By March 1944, the Allied invasion of Europe was inevitable. The question wasn't if, but when and where. German commanders knew the blow was coming. They'd fortified 2,400 miles of coastline from Norway to Spain. But resources were finite. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel couldn't defend everywhere with equal strength. He needed to know where the Allies would strike. That made signals intelligence Germany's most valuable weapon. The Funkabwehr, Germany's radio monitoring service, operated over 80 listening stations across occupied Europe. Trained operators sat at their positions around the clock, headphones pressed to their ears, transcribing every Allied transmission they could intercept. They couldn't break the encryption, but they didn't need to. The metadata told them everything. Call signs identified units. Transmission volumes indicated activity, levels. Radio direction finding pinpointed locations. By tracking which units were transmitting from which locations, German intelligence could build a remarkably accurate picture of Allied order of battle. This wasn't guesswork. This was science, refined over 4 years of war into a precise analytical tool. The technique hinged on a curious quirk of human nature. Every Morse code operator developed a unique fist, the personal rhythm and timing with which they sent signals. Some operators naturally sent slightly longer dashes. Others placed fractional pauses between letter groups. These variations were unconscious, as distinctive as a signature, and German intercept operators learned to recognize individual American and British radio operators by their fists alone. The intelligence picture that emerged by early 1944 was alarming. German listening posts tracked massive radio activity concentrated in southeastern England, directly across from Pas-de-Calais. The transmission patterns indicated the First United States Army Group, FUSAG, under command of General George S. Patton. Intercepts suggested the formation included the Third Army, the First Canadian Army, and multiple armored divisions. Radio direction finding fixed their positions near Dover and Folkestone. The numbers backed up the analysis. German intelligence estimated FUSAG's strength at 150,000 troops. Aerial reconnaissance reported tank parks, ammunition depots, and fuel storage facilities clustered around southeastern English ports. The logic was inescapable. The Allies would cross the Strait of Dover, the shortest route to France, striking at Pas-de-Calais, where their air cover would be strongest and their supply lines shortest. Rommel responded by concentrating the 15th Army, 15 full divisions, along the Pas-de-Calais coast. These were Germany's best troops, equipped with the newest Tiger tanks, positioned behind the strongest fortifications of the Atlantic Wall. If the Allies came across the Dover Strait, they'd meet a reception that would make Dieppe look like a training exercise. What made the German confidence particularly unshakable was the source reliability. This wasn't just radio intercepts. Double agents confirmed the intelligence. Aerial photography supported it. The pattern was consistent across every intelligence source. FUSAG was real. Patton was preparing to lead the invasion. The strike would come at Calais. The Funkabwehr operators were so confident in their analysis that they'd begun logging individual American radio operators by fist signature. Hauptmann Weber maintained detailed files on 12 FUSAG operators, tracking their transmission patterns, noting their habits and idiosyncrasies. He knew when they came on shift. He recognized their rhythm variations. He even noted when one operator appeared to have a cold, based on slight delays in his sending rhythm. Intelligence officers in Berlin studied these reports and concluded the Allied deception, if any existed, must be elsewhere. No force this size could maintain radio discipline this perfect unless it was real. Every transmission reinforced the pattern. Every intercept confirmed the assessment. FUSAG was preparing to cross the Strait of Dover, and German intelligence had tracked their every move. They were tracking ghosts, but ghosts that spoke with remarkably convincing voices, tapped out on Morse keys by operators who discovered something the German Funkabwehr's sophisticated analysis had never anticipated. Sometimes the simplest deceptions worked precisely because they seemed too stupid to be intentional. German signals intelligence prided itself on precision. The Funkabwehr wasn't staffed by amateurs. These were trained specialists who'd spent years perfecting their craft. They'd tracked Soviet formations across the Eastern Front. They'd identified British bomber groups before they'd reached German airspace. They understood radio deception because they practiced it themselves. That understanding made them confident they couldn't be fooled. Radio deception required perfect operator discipline. It required maintaining consistent fists across multiple operators impersonating the same unit. It required transmitting precisely calculated volumes of traffic, not too much to be suspicious, not too little to be invisible. Most critically, it required maintaining the deception for weeks or months without a single operator making a mistake that would expose the fraud. The Germans knew this because they'd tried it themselves. Wehrmacht deception operations consistently failed because maintaining operational security across dozens of radio operators was impossible. Someone always made a mistake. A fist changed. A call sign was used incorrectly. The pattern broke down, and Allied signals intelligence noticed immediately. So when German intelligence analyzed the FUSAG transmissions and found minor inconsistencies, they didn't trigger alarms. They expected minor variations. Real military operations were messy. Real radio nets had operator substitutions, equipment malfunctions, atmospheric interference. The slight variations in the FUSAG traffic patterns actually made them more credible, not less. Hauptmann Weber noted the inconsistencies in his logs, but his analysis never questioned the fundamental assessment. Operator 4A shows minor timing variations, possibly fatigue or equipment degradation. Pattern consistent with standard rotation protocol. Confirms continuing FUSAG preparation activity. What the Funkabware analysts couldn't conceive was that the Americans would intentionally introduce errors into their deception traffic. German doctrine taught that deception required perfection. Small mistakes revealed fraud. Therefore, if traffic contained small mistakes but maintained overall pattern consistency, it must be genuine. Meanwhile, across the channel, Allied intelligence was reaching a disturbing conclusion. Operation Fortitude, the plan to deceive Germany about the invasion location, was faltering. The Phantom FUSAG had been created using inflatable tanks, wooden artillery, and dummy landing craft. Reconnaissance planes would photograph them. Double agents would report on them. But maintaining radio silence from a supposedly massive military formation would be suspicious. So Allied signals intelligence created phony radio networks. Operators would impersonate units that didn't exist, generating traffic that suggested normal military activity. But there was a problem. Impersonating another operator's fist was nearly impossible. Each man's sending rhythm was as unique as his fingerprint. German intercept operators would notice if one operator suddenly replaced another without explanation. The solution required either finding operators who could perfectly mimic each other's fists, which was impossible, or finding a way to make operator substitution seem natural. Neither option looked feasible. Allied deception planners were preparing to accept that FUSAG's radio traffic would have to be limited, reducing its credibility. Then a radio operator named Technical Sergeant Jack Dramis had what his commanding officer called the stupidest idea I've heard all week. It was so simple, so obviously wrong by every doctrine, that it just might work. But only if the Germans believed what they expected to believe. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what you know about WWII radio deception operations. Drop a comment below and let me know if you'd heard about the Ghost Army's radio tricks before, and if you're enjoying these deep dives into World War II's hidden intelligence war, hit that subscribe button. These stories take serious research to get the details right, and knowing you're out there makes it all worthwhile. Technical Sergeant Jack Dramis wasn't supposed to be solving strategic problems. His job was simple: sit at a radio transmitter in southern England and impersonate a communications operator from the fictional 5th Armored Division, send traffic according to the script, maintain proper procedure, don't improvise. But Dramis had noticed something during his training with the 3133rd Signal Service Company, the radio deception unit attached to the Ghost Army. Every operator had a distinct fist. The Morse code instructors could identify their students blind just by listening to their sending rhythm. If the Allied operators could do it, so could the Germans. The problem was scale. Dramis was supposed to impersonate multiple operators across several fictional units. So were 20 other men in his section. Each of them needed to maintain distinct, recognizable fists, but they also needed to rotate through different call signs as units supposedly changed radio operators through normal personnel rotation. Standard procedure said this was impossible. The solution was to limit rotations, keep each operator with one call sign, except that FUSAG's radio traffic would seem abnormally static. Dramis thought that was stupid. Real units rotated operators all the time. Men went on leave. They got sick. They were reassigned. A unit that never changed operators would look suspicious to anyone paying attention. The Funkabware was definitely paying attention. During a training session in February 1944, Dramis approached Lieutenant James Fox, his platoon commander. "Sir, I think we're doing this wrong." Fox looked up from the transmission schedule. "Explain." "We're trying to maintain perfect consistency. one operator per call sign. But real units don't work that way. We should be rotating operators regularly, deliberately introducing inconsistencies. Fox frowned. The Germans will notice operator changes. They track fists. Exactly. They track them because operator changes are normal. If our fists never change, that's what's suspicious. Fox stared at him. You're suggesting we intentionally make our deception look less perfect? I'm suggesting we make it look real, sir. The idea violated every principle in the deception manual. But Fox was creative enough to recognize genius when he heard it, even when it came from a technical sergeant. He took the proposal to Major Ralph Ingersoll, the Ghost Army's operations officer. Ingersoll saw it immediately. It's brilliant because it's backward. We're not trying to fool them into thinking FUSAG is perfect. We're trying to fool them into thinking FUSAG is real. Within a week, the 3133rd had revised its entire operational protocol. Operators would deliberately rotate through call signs. They'd introduce minor timing variations to simulate fatigue, equipment problems, atmospheric interference. They'd make mistakes, then correct them, exactly as real operators did. Most critically, they'd create detailed backstories for their phantom operators. Operator 4A would have a slightly rushed fist because he was young and eager. Operator 2C would have perfectly measured rhythm because he was a veteran. When 4A went on leave for 3 days, 7B would substitute, and his fist would be noticeably different because he was a different person. The deception launched on March 15, 1944. Dramis and his fellow operators began transmitting as FUSAG units across southeastern England. The traffic followed real military patterns, message volumes consistent with divisions preparing for combat operations. But now, the operator fist rotated naturally, exactly as they would in genuine military formations. German intercept stations logged every transmission. Hauptmann Weber noticed the operator rotations immediately. He noted them in his daily reports. FUSAG units showing normal personnel rotation patterns. Operator 4A relieved by substitute operator, fist characteristics consistent with replacement protocol. The assessment never questioned whether FUSAG existed. The operator changes confirmed it existed. Real military units rotated personnel. The Germans knew this. They expected it. When FUSAG's radio traffic showed exactly the personnel rotation patterns that real divisions would show, it reinforced every other intelligence indicator suggesting Patton's army was real. Dramis and his team maintained the deception for 8 months. They created personalities for their phantom operators. They gave them habits and quirks. Operator 4A always transmitted slightly faster before lunch. Operator 2C's fist got more precise in the evening. These weren't scripted. They were natural variations that Dramis and the others introduced because real human beings weren't machines. The German Funkabwehr ate it up. Weber's reports grew more detailed, tracking 12 distinct FUSAG operators across multiple units. He noted when operators seemed tired. He recorded when equipment problems caused transmission gaps. He built a complete psychological profile of the FUSAG communications network, never suspecting that the network existed solely in the imaginations of 20 American radio operators. On June 6, 1944, when the real invasion hit Normandy beaches 200 miles west of where 15 German divisions sat waiting at Pas-de-Calais, the FUSAG radio net didn't go silent. That would have revealed the deception. Instead, it maintained normal transmission volumes, suggesting Patton's massive army was still preparing for the real invasion at Calais. German intelligence believed it. For 6 weeks after D-Day, the 15th Army remained at Pas-de-Calais, waiting for Patton's phantom divisions to cross the Dover Strait. Those 6 weeks gave Allied forces time to consolidate the Normandy beachhead, time they might not have had if those 15 divisions had reinforced the actual invasion. Dramis kept transmitting. He rotated through his call signs. He maintained his operator personalities. He made small mistakes and corrected them, exactly as real operators would. The Germans kept listening, kept logging, kept believing. When Patton's actual Third Army finally broke out from Normandy in August, German intelligence initially thought it was a deception because their signals intelligence told them the Third Army was still in southeastern England. The operator FIS said so, and operator FIS didn't lie. The truth emerged slowly, pieced together from captured German intelligence documents in the months after VE Day. Allied counterintelligence teams discovered the Funkabwehr's detailed files on FUSAG radio operators. The files were meticulous, documenting months of intercepts, operator FIS analysis, personnel rotation patterns. The Germans had tracked operators who never existed, logged the characteristics of men who'd never touched a radio key in southeastern England. Hauptmann Weber's logbooks were particularly revealing. He'd created psychological profiles of individual American operators based entirely on their transmission patterns. Operator 4A demonstrates characteristics of youth and inexperience, evident in rushed timing and occasional protocol errors. Likely recent training graduate. Operator 2C shows veteran discipline. Precise timing suggests 5+ years experience. Both operators were Jack Dramis. 4A was Dramis transmitting quickly because he was running late for lunch. 2C was Dramis transmitting carefully because he was following a complex scripted exchange. The personnel rotation that Weber had noted so carefully was Dramis switching call signs according to the deception schedule. The German analysis had been sophisticated but fatally flawed. Their operators could identify FIST characteristics with remarkable precision. Their direction-finding equipment accurately pinpointed transmission locations. Their traffic analysis correctly interpreted message volumes and patterns. Everything they observed was accurate. Their conclusions were completely wrong. The fatal assumption was that operator rotation patterns indicated genuine military operations. German doctrine taught that deception required consistency. Variable operator patterns suggested real units with real personnel changes. The Funkabwehr had built their entire analytical framework on this principle, refined through years of signals intelligence operations. Dramis had exploited that framework by feeding it exactly what it expected. Not perfect consistency, which would have been suspicious, but natural variation that matched German expectations of how real military units operated. The deception succeeded because it embraced imperfection. Major Ingersoll's post-war analysis quantified the impact. The 3133rd Signal Service Company, with just 296 men, had generated enough radio traffic to simulate 3 complete armies, totaling over 150,000 troops. German intelligence had tracked their transmissions for 8 months, from March through October 1944, never suspecting the fraud. The intelligence value was incalculable. 15 German divisions, approximately 150,000 troops, remained at Pas-de-Calais for 6 critical weeks after D-Day, waiting for Patton's Phantom Army to arrive. Those divisions included the 1st SS Panzer Division and the 12th SS Panzer Division, Germany's most elite armored units. Had they reinforced Normandy during the first week, when Allied forces were most vulnerable, the invasion outcome could have been dramatically different. British intelligence officer Colonel Roger Hesketh, who coordinated Operation Fortitude, wrote in his classified after-action report, "The success of FUSAG deception was primarily attributable to signals intelligence operations that convinced German listening stations of the Phantom Army's reality. The introduction of deliberate operator rotation, contrary to standard deception doctrine, proved more effective than any other single deception measure. The technique spread." After Dramis's success, Allied deception, operations across all theaters began incorporating intentional inconsistencies. Radio operators were trained to introduce natural variations rather than maintain perfect discipline. The principle was codified. Effective deception mimics reality's imperfections. German counterintelligence officer Wilhelm Flicka, interrogated after the war, explained the German perspective. We knew the Allies practiced radio deception. We expected them to maintain absolute consistency to avoid detection. When FUSAG transmissions showed normal military personnel rotation patterns, we concluded they represented genuine operations. We never suspected the Americans would deliberately make their deception less perfect. That's exactly what made it perfect. Dramis's stupid idea, the notion that deception should look sloppy enough to be real, had turned signals intelligence into a weapon of strategic deception. The Germans heard what they expected to hear. An expectation, carefully managed, proved more powerful than any encryption. Technical Sergeant Jack Dramis survived the war, though he'd never fire a weapon in combat. The Ghost Army's operations remained classified until 1996, long after most of the participants had passed away. When the files were finally declassified, Dramis's contribution emerged as one of the war's most effective intelligence deceptions. The statistical impact was measurable. Studies by military historians calculated that the 6-week delay in German reinforcements reaching Normandy resulted in approximately 4,000 to 6,000 fewer Allied casualties during the critical beachhead consolidation phase. The 15th Army's absence from Normandy gave Allied forces time to bring ashore the reserves and supplies necessary to withstand German counterattacks. Dramis received no medals. The Ghost Army's work remained secret for decades, and by the time it was declassified, most recognition programs had expired. He returned to civilian life in Detroit, worked as an electrical engineer, and never spoke publicly about his wartime service until the 1990s. When interviewed in 1998, at age 76, he described his deception technique with characteristic modesty. I just thought about how real radio operators actually work. They're not robots. They get tired. They make mistakes. I figured if we acted human, we'd look more real than if we tried to be perfect. The technique revolutionized signals deception doctrine. Post-war intelligence schools studied the FUSAG operation, teaching that effective deception required embracing controlled imperfection. The principle influenced Cold War intelligence operations, where American and Soviet forces both employed naturalized deception that incorporated realistic inconsistencies. The Ghost Army collectively received the Congressional Gold Medal in 2022, one of Congress's highest civilian honors. Only 7 members remained alive to attend the ceremony. Dramis had passed away in 2006, but his daughter accepted recognition on his behalf. The citation specifically mentioned the radio deception operations that confused enemy intelligence through unconventional application of signals analysis. The FUSAG deception influenced technological development in unexpected ways. Modern computerized deception systems incorporate randomized variation algorithms specifically designed to mimic human imperfection. Military communication systems include features that deliberately introduce realistic operator inconsistencies to make simulated traffic appear genuine to sophisticated analysis. Historians continue debating the counterfactual. What if the 15 German divisions at Pas-de-Calais had reinforced Normandy immediately? General Dwight Eisenhower's post-war memoirs acknowledged that German armored reinforcements during the first 3 days could have made the invasion outcome problematic. The Normandy beachhead was most vulnerable before Allied forces established supply lines and brought reserve divisions ashore. The irony wasn't lost on post-war analysts. Germany had deployed the most sophisticated signals intelligence operation in military history. Their operators were trained. Their equipment was advanced. Their analytical methods were sound. They'd developed the very concept of operator fist identification. Yet they'd been deceived by a technique so simple it seemed stupid, making deception look imperfect enough to be real. The lesson persisted. Perfect is suspicious. Real operations are messy, filled with human error and inconsistency. Dramis understood that German intelligence would expect military operations to look like military operations, complete with tired operators, equipment problems, and personnel rotations. So he gave them exactly what they expected. They never questioned it because it matched their sophisticated understanding of how real military communications worked. It looked real because it was deliberately, carefully imperfect. Wars are won by generals and tanks and aircraft, but also by sergeants who notice what everyone else overlooks. Jack Dramis wasn't a strategic planner. He wasn't an intelligence analyst. He was a radio operator who understood one simple truth. Humans aren't perfect, and trying to simulate perfection reveals the fraud. German intelligence failed not because their analysis was wrong, but because it was too sophisticated for its own good. They'd built complex frameworks for detecting deception, developed precise methods for identifying operator fists, created entire analytical schools devoted to signals intelligence. All that sophistication made them vulnerable to a deception that worked by refusing to be sophisticated. Dramis exploited the fundamental flaw in any analytical system, the assumption that reality follows patterns. German intelligence expected deception to look like deception, too perfect, too consistent, too clean. When FUSAG's radio traffic showed normal military messiness, complete with tired operators and equipment problems, it matched German expectations of reality. They never questioned it because it looked exactly like what real military operations should look like. That was the genius, not in creating perfect deception, but in creating deception that embraced imperfection. One radio operator's stupid idea kept 15 German divisions frozen in place for 6 weeks. Those 6 weeks saved thousands of Allied lives and secured the Normandy beachhead. The breakthrough came not from superior technology or brilliant strategy, but from recognizing that sometimes the best way to lie is to tell a truth that sounds like a lie told well. Reality, as it turned out, was the perfect cover story. The Germans believed it because they'd learned to recognize it, and Dramis gave them exactly what they'd learned to believe. If you found this story as fascinating as I did researching it, I'd appreciate if you'd like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are dozens more untold stories from World War II that deserve to be remembered, and I'll be bringing you a new one every week. What should I cover next? Let me know in the comments below.